All right, good morning. So I know that the workload in the class has been absolutely overwhelming thus far, so I'll try to adjust for that a little bit. So I'm kind of curious. Right now, I notice many of you are finishing up your programs. I'm curious, what do you think you're going to do next? I mean, hang around at home and play video games until parental units tell you you have to get a job? And then you have to explain to them the harsh reality that jobs are not as plentiful as they were when they were your age? You're laughing because I think that there's a certain amount of truth to this, right? That is something that I certainly picked up on is it's hard to miss the fact that AI is posited as essentially getting rid of entry-level jobs. I had somebody yesterday tell me that the traditional pyramid where you've got lots of people at the bottom and a few people at the top is turning into a diamond where it's one person at the bottom, lots of people in the middle, and then one person at the top. And I've actually read things that suggest that they're trimming the edges off the diamond as well. But that doesn't mean there aren't going to be other opportunities. And of course, the question that I always step back and ask is, okay, is that really a bad thing? If we actually didn't have to work as much, would that be horrible? Probably doesn't fit in our current economic model, but that's a different issue, isn't it? It's a different way of thinking about the problem. And that's always an important skill when you start looking at building solutions. Don't focus on the tools. Don't focus on what people did yesterday, because the tools that you have today are different. The problems might seem superficially the same, but then they're not identical. The same situation at different points in time may actually call for different solutions. Now, always keep your mind open to that. I used to laugh because I'd say, when they talk about unemployment, I was like, well, why don't we just cut down the number of hours people who have jobs are doing then? So everybody can enjoy their life a little more. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're one of those people who absolutely loves working. Starbucks is probably hiring on campus. A friend of mine actually finished his PhD at Georgia Tech a number of years ago and went to work. He was from Korea, and he went to work for Uber, and he had to explain to his mother he wasn't driving a car. I think he moved on to Meta after that, but these are the kinds of companies. I have to figure out why this isn't working. The orientation is wrong. These are the kinds of companies that use cloud resources quite a bit. Cloud computing is a huge, huge use for companies like Uber, like Meta, like Apple, like Microsoft, like Google. So it was interesting putting this set of slides together because I knew what I wanted to say, and then I realized I probably needed to get to some prerequisites here. How many of you have actually had any experience with AI? How many of you would call yourselves experts at AI? Okay, well, we'll get a little honesty. People are kind of willing to admit, I've sort of heard of AI. I read an article about it on 4chan or something. So tell me, when we talk about AI, what are we talking about? What's in the big picture view right now? When you sit there and you start looking online and you start reading articles about AI and you start hearing these stories, what are they talking about? AGI? What does AGI mean?
Artificial general intelligence.
And what does that mean?
We want to create AI that can do anything.
So we want a machine that can pick up any task and do it. But those aren't physical tasks, they're cognitive tasks. when you look at economic models, one of the interesting things to actually look at is YouTube or Twitch. Very similar models. Anybody stream on Twitch? Anybody watch streamers on Twitch? How many people who stream on Twitch or put content up on YouTube, because YouTube has streaming and it also has, longer term content, how many of those people you think earn a living doing that? Ever seen the movie The Hunger Games? It's probably, maybe you saw it when you were a kid, but well, that's pretty much what those are. They're Hunger Games, right? They are, let's give a big reward to a small number of people to motivate everyone else to give us stuff that we can monetize and use for free. And that's what we use cloud computing for. Seriously. We watch what you're doing. We analyze what you're doing. We collect the data of what your actions are, how you interact with the world, and we then figure out how to shape your view of the world so that it meets our ends and needs. I mean, I'm not trying to be dystopian here. I'm just trying to make sure that you have a realistic view of what a lot of the things, the projects we talk about, a lot of them are going to be about that. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. It just is. It's kind of the reality we live in. So I sat back and I said, right, so a lot of people here have some exposure to AI, but not a huge amount of exposure to AI. I've spent the last several years working with generative AI, large language models. Does anyone know what a large language model actually is? I mean, you can probably name some. Any names? Just shout it out. It's okay. Claude. What a name. It's the way I usually feel when I'm walking around and trip on my own feet. Any others? I'm sure that people have heard of ChatGPT and Gemini. How many of you have heard of Kimi, K2? How many of you have heard of DeepSeek? How many of you have heard of Mistral? What is a large language model? Imagine we took you and trained you by making you read everything there was that we could find in print so that you would have the most expansive educational knowledge in the universe. Well, our universe. That's essentially what LLMs have become. The reason I talked about that, the way that the monetization works, is I find there's a certain irony in that they're taking all sorts of works, pushing them into large language models so they can do things like make Ghibli drawings for you, or create deep fakes that don't require a whole lot of effort, and then sell them back to you. So we take stuff on one end and we don't pay for it, we don't want to pay for it, and then we turn it into something that we want to charge you for. Any of you ever heard of Adobe? Adobe has this thing called Adobe Stock, which is where you can go and buy stock photos, pictures, images, things that artists used to make. And now when you go there, it's 90% AI generated. Now, the way the AI generates it is that they took all of the stuff that human artists had done before that and shoved it into the model and then used that to create new drawings. And what I find ironic about that is, at least in the United States, and I suspect it will apply in Canada and the EU, AI-generated artwork is not copyrightable. There's a very famous case in the United States where I think it was a bonobo or a baboon or a primate of some sort who got a photographer's camera and took many pictures of himself. And there was a big battle because the pictures were fantastic. They were absolutely amazing pictures. Clearly, this was a photographic genius. And the question was who owned the rights to those photos. And ultimately, the decision was that a non-human created work was not eligible for copyright in the United States. And the US is the most likely jurisdiction to give companies these sorts of rights, so I don't think you're going to find it elsewhere. And so I go to Adobe stock and I notice that 90% of the photos there are AI generated, which oddly enough means that if I license it from Adobe, they could enforce the terms of the license as a contractual obligation. I put it on my website, you come along and say, hey, that's really cool, you steal it. They have no recourse. And I looked at that and I said, how is this not a going out of business strategy? They cut their short-term costs to create a product that they can no longer protect. So large language models are in fact this odd kind of neural network, this very specific kind of neural network where they stuff a huge amount of information into them. They have very, very large networks, and effectively they are pattern matchers. So you give them a pattern, and what they do is they look for the most likely continuation. So you ask it a question, what's the continuation? The most likely continuation is an answer. They have this tendency to do exactly the same thing. This is a brand new paper, came out I think the last week from OpenAI. They have the same, they do exactly the same thing you do on exams when you don't know the answer. You got a multiple choice test sitting in front of you. There's no penalty for picking one of the answers. You have no idea. What do? You just guess. That's exactly what they do. It turns out these things called hallucinations appear to be what an LLM does when it doesn't know the answer, and so it just simply says, hey, I've been told that I'm supposed to be helpful and friendly, and so I'm going to give you an answer, even if it's just a guess. And from their perspective, that's the most likely pattern. Just take a guess. Well, you probably don't live your life the same way that you take exams. But LLMs have been trained in a way that, number one, optimizes for giving you an answer. They literally, so you shove the known universe's information into this LLM, and then you come along and you do the electroshock therapy where you give it a reward and a punishment. It's actually just presented as data, but it's a reward and punishment model called reinforcement learning with human feedback. And literally what they have is humans who sit there and look at the answers that they give, the LLMs give back, and they rate whether they like the answer or they don't like the answer. And so what it does, it creates an AI that gives you an answer it thinks will please you. Can you see why this might not necessarily always be the best way to get the truth? I mean, you know, when someone you know looks at you and says, does this outfit look good on me? What's the right answer? Yeah, it looks fantastic. But you look fantastic in anything, right? Because, of course, we know that that's exactly the true answer. Okay, so what does that have to do with this class? Well, part of what we're going to be talking about is using generative AI as part of cloud computing, because, frankly, one of the challenges with cloud computing is there's so many tools to choose from that we could sit here and go over 10 tools a day for every lecture, and at the end of it, you wouldn't have learned anything because we would have gone over way too much stuff, and you wouldn't really know what to do with them. This is actually one of the places where generative AI is extremely helpful. Have you ever gone and tried to find a piece of documentation for anything? Now, I'm old enough to remember when I had physically printed manuals. Like, you'd actually have books you had to look up and read. And then those got replaced by PDFs or things that predated PDFs. And eventually, it turned into web pages and lots of documentation, and the propensity to create so much documentation that now you have the opposite problem, which is you can't find the very specific thing you're looking for right now. So what you happen to be able to do is to use a large language model that has been trained on a huge corpus of information and say, this is what I'm trying to do, how should I go about doing it? And it will then sift through that, and it will say, here's the most logical completion for that, i.e., here's the answer that is most likely. But of course, the answer you get back is going to be relative to the context of the question that you asked. If you ask a sloppy question, it's sort of like if somebody comes up to you and says, what should I do to fix my problem? And you're like, I don't know. You didn't tell me what the problem is. But remember, they were trained to give you a helpful answer. You are a helpful assistant. So you make something up. It took a lot more time to build these slides than I expected, mostly because I started going through and saying, you're going to need a whole bunch of other reference materials and whatnot, and you probably have noticed there was probably some Canvas notification that various things got posted yesterday. So some of you might actually want to get jobs when you're done versus just simply hanging out and, going hiking, hanging out with your friends. I don't know. Is anybody going to grad school? One person. I'm so sorry for you. See, traditionally, that was the thing that you did when there were no jobs available and you finished your degree, you just go to grad school, you get a master's degree, or if you're really, really, truly convinced you weren't hireable, you get a PhD, so you can remain not hireable. So you're in a job interview, and you're asked to use AI to help solve an architectural problem. The question I ask you is, what's the distinguishing characteristic between the candidate that gets hired and the candidate that doesn't get hired? It's going to end up being how you use the tool, how you interact with the tool. Can you coax the tool to give you not just an answer, but a workable, correct answer? Because any fool can say, yo, ChatGPT, give me an answer. And it'll probably, I haven't tried that particular prompt, but it would probably just simply make something up, 42. And so I'm going to keep coming back to this over and over again as we talk about this. Oh, and by the way, I dug up a whole bunch of sources and to support what I'm talking about here. Perplexity was very helpful on that. Probably don't use Perplexity, but Perplexity is actually one of those tools that's kind of scaring Google because it does a better job of search than Google does these days. But Google's going to catch up too, because Google has a lot of intellectual capital. And this is an important thing to do. One of the reasons I use Perplexity is it gives you real links that actually work, as opposed to, it sounded like a good idea when I made it up. Okay, so I'm actually going to try this. We'll see how well it goes. The orientation of the screens is confusing here. What shall I use? Let me use... Do I have it installed here? Oh, interesting. All right, well, then I'm going to go to a web browser, and in just a second I will actually switch to a real web browser. There we go. Windows P, I think it was. So you can actually see what I'm typing. And I had AI tell me yesterday what it is you're supposed to do when you're giving a presentation and you need to switch between presenter mode and single screen mode. I said, okay, cool. So let me go to Perplexity, since I do use Perplexity. And the question I presented was... No, that's not the right. This one, this screen. This one. Help me build a scalable API. Yeah, Perplexity might not be the best choice. Let's just use ChatGPT. Help me build a scalable API. I've never actually tried this prompt directly. Thinking for a better answer. Oh, great. Yes, well, welcome to GPT-5. Planning scalable API responses. So you can see that you get this little thinking aspect. They put that in. It became really popular last summer when there was a paper that said, oh, we're going to start having chain of thought, is what they call it, where they make the LLM explain its reasoning process. But of course, that implies that there's a reasoning process and not a message continuation process. So it's part of what gets very murky here is when you start listening to what they're saying, you realize that it's like listening to a salesperson. The words come out of their mouth and you go, but this doesn't really Love it. Let's co-design a reference implementation you can actually ship, and you can tell me when you want to deviate. Wow, look at that. Actually gave you a whole series of potentially vague answers from previous. And I'm actually concerned because I did explore this set of questions with ChatGPT. And ChatGPT has history. It remembers conversations that you have. Now, it doesn't remember things the way that you and I remember them. We use what's called episodic memory to remember things that are temporally based. What it uses is semantic memory, which is, it says, oh, gee, you're talking about an API. Let me go look in our prior conversations and pull up messages related to APIs. So in fact, another example, let's go see what Gemini will do, because Gemini doesn't have that. Or actually, Kimi.com, since most of you probably haven't used Kimi, but there we go. What was that? I didn't copy and paste it, I actually typed it. How terrible of me. Help me build a scalable API. So Kimi doesn't have history. I did test that yesterday. Very interestingly enough, DeepSeek does have history, but doesn't realize it has history, which tells me something about the way. Happy to help. Scalable API can mean lots of things. So it's actually doing a pretty good job of not just simply giving you a vague answer. It's basically saying the question you asked is not very well bounded. So you can see that these very different, similar but different, and the behavior keeps changing because all of these companies are trying to turn this into a usable product. And they're spending insane amounts of money to do it. So they keep changing it. But there you go, okay. So it's asking lots of questions, and these are exactly the kinds of questions that we're going to be talking about here, right? What kind of cost, what kind of performance do you want? And so let me do this again. And this time I'm going to ask the second question, which is, I need a prediction API that scales. God forbid that let's see, previous. Let me go. Can I grab that slide? There we go. Come back over here, type this in. Now I've given it a very specific, targeted question with a lot more context. Most of the work that's going on right now using AI coding agents involves, now they're calling it context engineering. And what's eerie about it is that you end up writing architecture and design documents and sharing them with your LLM. Pretty much the same thing you would do with your software developers. But they still go off the rails. I mean, I could point to the $3,500 Gemini bill for going off the rails. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll try again. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll try again. Just stop. So there you go. I mean, this is a very nice answer, and it even fits within the constraints of the problems that we're going to be working with, which is, how do we do this without spending our own money? I had this nice conversation with the folks here at UBC. They still actually don't know if they have funding for AWS. And so that's why I spent some time and said, okay, well, what options are already available? It turns out there's tons of options, which is why I put together a guide there that you can find on Canvas now about, so GitHub for Students, which is a really good one because it gives you access to all sorts of mechanisms and facilities there. Apparently, UBC does have support for Copilot as well, and there are other resources here. AWS has a free tier, Azure has a free tier. They both have student-oriented questions. So here you go. Now you have a very concrete example, and this is Kimi K2, which is actually a very good model. I've used it with Cloud Code. So here's another interesting trick. So now when we start coding with AI, we need to talk about the tools that we use to do that. How many of you have used AI to write code? How many of you have done that with a command line tool? See, there's a lot fewer hands. How many of you have used a chat interface to do that? More hands. How many of you are doing it inside of a code editor? Cursor? Few hands. VS Code? More hands. So somebody who has done it but hasn't used Cursor or VS Code, what are you using? Zed? Sorry? Clang? Okay. Of the command lines, how many of you are using Cloud Code? How many of you are using Gemini Code? That's funny. Gemini is actually still free. Some value free, up to a limit. How many of you have used Codex? That's OpenAI's. And it has a free tier as well, interestingly enough. There's a way of getting some number of free tokens a day from OpenAI. You just have to agree to let them use your content as part of their training data. I mean, if I were a student and I was simply writing projects for a class, why would I care? Here, take my crappy code and put it in your collection and teach other people how to write it. You can actually use Cloud Code with Kimi K2. You can actually use Cloud Code with DeepSeek. I spent some time looking, and in fact, you can use Light LLM to proxy. So you get queries from Cloud Code using the Anthropic API, and Light LLM will then convert them into the relevant APIs of other models behind that. It's like, good Lord, it's like putting all these different pieces together. It's much more modular than you think it is when you first start approaching it. If you're using VS Code, you get Copilot. And Copilot is essentially just GPT-5 right now with Microsoft's polish on it. But if you want to use Gemini inside of Copilot, you can do that as well. I use Claude Code inside of Copilot. You just open a terminal and you can do it there. And Claude Code knows that you're talking to the editor. It actually knows what file you're looking at. So if you ask it a question, it gets the context of what it is that you're doing to make this easier for you. And if you're not playing with these tools, you should be. Because that's going to be something that if you don't want to just hang out in the basement and play video games for the next decade, you're going to want to be able to explain to prospective employers how you've already learned how to use these tools, how they can be a force multiplier for you. Then you can get into fancy tools. Claude Flow. Anybody played with Claude Flow? That's scary. So about 2 or 3 months ago, Anthropic added agents to Claude Code. And an agent is nothing more than a fork. They fork the process, and they then run a subcommand inside of the fork process. What you end up with is an orchestration layer, where your Claude code is starting up other Claude codes. And the reason that they do this is because every single LLM has exactly the same problem. The way an LLM works is we give it a message, and then we add your user input. And then it gives us back a continuation. And then we take the message we had, we add your input, we add its response, and that becomes our new message. And then we feed it into the inference engine again the next time you ask another question. So literally, these things just grow monotonically. Just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the problem is inside of the model itself, the cost of processing the message grows, I think it's by a square cube. So it's into the second or into the third. And the longer the message is, the more power it takes, and the power it takes, the more expensive it is. And so the companies that implement these models have implemented a variety of techniques for shrinking that message down. Because part of the problem is, have anyone ever used Git with hooks? Hooks? This is something you do in professional development, right? Because you're not going to be submitting your code once it's passed. Make sure the formatting is correct, make sure that it passes when the smoke tests are, at least it passes those kinds of things. You run, so I write Python these days, you run rough, and it will generate 10,000 lines of error code for you. And you're using an LLM as a tool for your programming. Those 10,000 lines now become a permanent part of the conversation you're having with the LLM. So it builds a context window really fast. And that's why being able to use an agent to say, yo, agent, you go off into your context window, and get this stuff work right. When it's working right, you tell me. And I can resolve that one without setting the context window of the orchestrator itself. Let's go back and see if PowerPoint can recover from this. Of course not. That would be too easy. So let's turn slide. Here we go. Back again. Most of the time, we're not actually going to be asking those sorts of overarching questions. We're going to be asking much more fine-grained questions like things about documentation. There are entire tools now for AI coding agents that are focused on providing you with effective access to documentation. I use a couple of them. I use one called Ref, which is really good at taking my code and indexing it all. So that I can find all sorts of things in my markdown files, for example, in my code files, in my comments, and tell me about things that way very, very fast. Faster than I can find them with Ref. Even with these tools, though, it's very common for us to find old stuff. One of the downsides using LLM is training on Stack Overflow. So the Stack Overflow code from 10 years ago, where Python 3.1, 3.2, let's choose something modern, was actually the norm, so the answer is related to 3.2. The problem I have over and over again is I'm trying to use Python 3.12, or 3.3, which is even better, because it's trying to get rid of the little interpreter block, so you can get real multi-threading. That's performance benefit. I use Cloud Code. I like probably 70% of the people who use Cloud Code on a regular basis, run it with the dangerously skip permissions option. Anybody else use Cloud Code with dangerously skip permissions? Right. Because who wants to sit there and answer every single question? Is it okay if I run this? Is it okay if I run this? Is it okay if I run this? No, I'll put it in a sandbox. Go ahead, I got that. You can do whatever you want, and fuck it up. I'll just blow away. I don't care. It's way better than it's just not a good experience to sit there and do these things in sample mode. Anthropic has decided that if you're running in dangerously skip permissions mode, it's going to rewrite your environment to make sure that it has a sanitized environment. So I'm running Python code in my development environment. I'm running Python in a virtual environment, and the very first thing that happens is class starts up and it starts trying to do things, and it's not running in my virtual environment, even though I started in a virtual environment. So if somebody finds out there are these things that it's doing, they don't work in Python 3.10. Well, yeah, that's fine, because you're using Python 3.13. So the fact that it doesn't work in Python 3.10 doesn't matter. But it doesn't stop and say, excuse me, but this looks like you're running Python 3.10, and the project does say it's supposed to be Python 3.13. How should I fix this? No, we trained it. Don't bother the user. Instead, let's just plow ahead and rewrite the entire code base so it will all work with Python 3.10. And suddenly all of your beautiful 3.12, 3.15 notations and whatnot, it's really better just 3.8 because then you'll have to use the technical module. And say, no, stop this. Yes. And I'm explaining and describing the pain of using these things, but you need to be experiencing that pain because you need to be able to talk about that in that hypothetical job interview where you're saying, I'm working with these, and you have some war stories to tell that actually make it sound like you're not just simply telling them what they want to hear. Because they probably don't trust you more than they trust an LLM. But you're smarter than an LLM because the one thing you have that an LLM doesn't have, you actually have lived experience. You've done things wrong, you've learned from. LLMs don't learn. They will keep repeating the same mistakes, or maybe they'll statistically predicted to repeat. But they'll keep doing the same thing over and over again. How many of you actually written working code with an AI coding tool? It's like, wow, it's not, you get this vibe coding thing, people go down and they go, yeah, I did what I did. But then you find sometimes it's a really, really good job. I used it's actually. No, I ended up using ChatGPT to build the Canvas, free Canvas HTML code that I put into Canvas because both Claude and Gemini both produced didn't work properly in Canvas because it turned out Canvas has its own allowed HTML coding standard. And ChatGPT 5 is trained in that. So it's pretty boxes. I got it. I'm doing it. I'm some program. I have a visual studio built running on CLI. That's it. That's what the world needs. It's better CLI. I've had CLI before. I was like, no, I don't know what to put commands. This is Microsoft Live. I want I can't ability. I wanted to do something useful. Even if it's just showing the state of the world, I want it to say, hey, yeah, I'm working, as opposed to, yo, buddy, go to the documentation. You need to send these 60 different switches and these 45 different options. I hate those kind of CLIs. They're not friendly. But again, people know the CLIs being friendly. And they are useful for debugging problems, especially when outside of the domain expertise that you have. So write some random weird error. I can just copy paste it into an LLM and say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm seeing, what are you doing wrong? And then you can get an answer that says, here's what you need to change, here's what you need to do. It saves time. It is, in essence, one of the big threats for Google environments is choosing. I think Google was well known for. So I had to write some code. I put in code, and so you take code and I'm going to know it. Here you go. The idea is you just plot the code down. Why is this working? It's pretty much the same thing as you turn to the person next to you and say, here's this really crappy code. Please tell me why this works. And you look at it and you go, I hate actually when people come to me with code and say, it doesn't work. And then I have to go through, no, I don't like doing that. It's a teaching moment. So what did you think it was going to do? What did you like it to do? So you explain to me what it's actually doing. I guess it's sophisticated, and a lot of my coding in life was written in C. I don't think I've ever written C code. It's kind of like juggling short lines. You can do anything in C. Just a number, pass it into a pointer, and shove something into it. We call that programming the computer, actually. You know, it's like, sometimes our devices just have a register and just put something in that address, and you know what it is. But we'll still let you do that. But that does require a certain level of understanding, like everything. You really have to understand machine architecture. You have to understand memory, so otherwise, it will do exactly what you told it to do. One of my comments was, instead of being a C code that you look at and see what you wanted it to do, look at this and look at it and see what the computer is actually doing. It's not surprising how that technique works, because it abstracts you away from what you think it's doing versus what it's actually doing. So these queries, very classic example. One's vague. The other one is, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm supposed to do, what's wrong. You're getting an actionable response from the second one, and you're not getting that from the first one. So the observation here is that the constraints actually improve the output you get. So the context is, the more likely it is you're going to get something useful back out. And that applies when you're writing code, or you're asking about your relationship with your significant other, or your ex-significant other. I don't recommend using LLMs for personal advice. But people use them. Anybody ask a personal advice question to ChatGPT or whatever, Claude or Gemini? How's the advice? There you go. Because they're programmed to stroke your ego. Oh, sometimes you just need somebody to say, you're a really good person. Well, they just stole money from my roommate. But it's okay, they'll understand. You're a great person. Yeah, sure. Different models have different strengths and weaknesses. So learn their ins and outs. And I find that ChatGPT 5 is a semantic little brown noser. Makes me nauseous. Actually, it's like I started in a conversation with someone. You are just looking at ways of giving these performative work that you think I want to hear, and that's not what I want. I want you to make stuff. I want you to tell the truth. And you can't make them tell the truth. That's by setting the context appropriately. So your job is to learn how to critically evaluate the output from AI. Imagine you work for Code Inc., this software development company where we hire 1,000 interns and we're going to give you. And we're going to be rating you based upon your performance relative to everyone else. I'm talking about stress. Backstabbing. Nice to your face. Talking shit when you're out there. Because it's not games. It is just something like that. And it is an intense fight. So how this is how to succeed in Hunger Games. So who can come out top? And the answer is don't trust what it's telling you. But also realize that despite the fact you can't trust it, it can still be helpful. And you have to hold that tension and learn how to deal with that. And I'm going to be talking about this on, but you need to learn that. And the only way to learn that is by just simply playing with it, experimenting with the tools. And that's the reason I'm encouraging you to use them with this. We're going to be talking about cloud computing, we're talking about different services, how many web servers, how many different services does Amazon actually have? How many database products does Amazon actually offer? Probably at least Google, which is where Google came from that. Any mention back in 10 to 100 is Google, Google Access, Google Power. Because you need to do the numbers. So one thing to keep in mind is that you have a classmate of friends in the CS program, and you can say, this is why I'm asking the LLM, does it make sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to them, probably not making sense to the LLM, but they're going to be honest enough to tell you that's a really shitty question. Versus ChatGPT will go, oh, of course, you'll question, or Claude will say, this reframed everything. If the next time Claude and I start calling out performative behavior, it will stop. Look at how to work it. ChatGPT won't stop. Not anymore. So you will need to have access. You can do this with local resources. That means if you have a computer, does anybody here have a computer? Nobody here has a computer. All right, well, it turns out that UBC actually provides people with computer resources, and they probably speed, but they are available. You can run LLMs and very slow rates, even at the most primitive computers. Even on phones now, right? Gemini, Google just released a Gemini model that's mobile on devices. Believe it or not. My laptop has a deep unit, and actually it runs Gemma free, pretty fast. I was really impressed with how quick it runs. You have Copilot, that's something that is available through EC, and if you get GitHub Student App, it's available through GitHub as well. That's because they have, of course, belongs to Microsoft, and Microsoft, of course, has a deal with OpenAI to continue using ChatGPT until it uses AI. So it's an interesting tension. Microsoft is looking to not rely heavily on OpenAI, but heavily as quickly as possible. interesting. More Hunger Games. Coding tools. Cursor, Claude, CLI. Claude actually has a desktop interface as well. You can use desktop interfaces, web interfaces to generate code. They will do that quite nicely. Gemini has and they all more or less work. Now, that doesn't mean that you get, so the support for these different tools has different costs associated with it. You can actually use Google's Gemini Code for free for some number of operations per day. It's like 1,000 requests a day or somewhat. That sounds like a lot, but you can chew through 1,000 requests in an hour or two. But still, you might have a free tier. So VS Code has Copilot built into it. If you're on GitHub, you will have free access to VS Code. If you've got the student pack, you get better access because you get free repositories and whatnot, because they want you to get sucked into the GitHub environment so that you'll keep using it. And because everybody coming out, this is interesting because it actually involves Microsoft. So Microsoft at one point had their own source code control system that was licensed from a different company called Perforce. And they decided to switch to Git because all of the graduates coming out of university were now used to using Git, not using Perforce. Or they had their own name for it. Source Depot is what they called it at Microsoft. And so Microsoft had to do this huge amount of engineering work in order to make Windows work with Git, because it turns out that when the repository is half a terabyte, it doesn't make sense to put that on everybody's machine locally. So they had to build an entire system for doing a sparse configuration. So it doesn't pull all the code down now, it pulls the code you're working on, and then it has these indirect references to the code that you're not working on. Some of these tools can actually be used with different models. I did mention that. It's still on this laptop, actually, where I set it up to run with Kimi K2. I won't show that. That's fine. So things that you will actually need in order to run some of the more interesting tools. You'll probably want Python. Anybody ever written Python code? I think half of you just are too tired to raise your hands at this point. I don't believe. Is there any? So the people who do not write Python, I suggest that you might want to learn that, because it is a useful tool for doing almost anything with data and almost anything with cloud. It's also very, very useful to use Git. The class has a Git organization. It's internal to UBC. You will be submitting your projects by giving us the access to you're going to give us the hash of your repo, so you can tell us the repo and the hash. But remember I said, dangerously skip permissions? That's what it is, dangerously skip permissions. You're going to run like that. You're going to learn to run like that, and you're going to want to have Git there. And you're going to want to have probably a separate repo from the one that your LLM coder can access, so that it can't do something like, force a rebase with an empty repository. Haha, sorry, I deleted everything. I think there was a horror story about something like that, where where the AI coding agent insisted it had deleted everything in production. How many of you have done a co-op? So you know that interns are inherently unstable already, right? So it couldn't be surprising that this could happen with an intern as well as it can with an LLM. Maybe LLMs are really just interns in disguise. I don't know. you also need a willingness to explore here, because I will tell you that this is a rapidly changing landscape. And once you start looking at these things, your feeds will be filled with articles and stories about the evolution of AI coding. And you'll see the same faces over and over again telling you, and you'll get to recognize them. Some of them are made by AI, where they actually do videos with AI-generated graphics and whatnot. And after a while, you begin to realize that these are just fluff. And you can ignore those. And then there are the people who kind of have these scrappy, sort of not very fancy visuals, but actually seem to know what they're talking about. There are some people who present papers. They do the more academic-focused side of things. And then there are the people who basically constantly are downloading and using these tools and giving you their evaluation of them. And take it with a grain of salt. Play with them yourself. For example, Claude Flow showed up, I don't know, about a month ago, and I started playing with it. And I actually did get it to build an entire project from a basic description in about an hour. A working project, that was even more amazing, in a language that I don't actually know. It wrote it all in TypeScript. And then I tried to get it to do it in Python, and it didn't work so well. Interesting. Model Context Protocol has emerged in the last 8 or 9 months as a tooling mechanism that is really easy to use because, of course, it lacks even basic things like security. So when you start running MCP agents, they're basically plug-in tools. When you start running these tools, what happens inside of the LLM is it's given a list of the tools that it can invoke and a description of what they do. And so the LLM can come back, and so now what we've got is multiple layers of conversation going on here, right? Where you say, this is what I want to do, and then the framework packages that up and sends it along with, and here's a description of the tools that you can use to explore this, and it then sends that to the LLM, who then sends back a message, and it may be the message is, please run these tools. And then it will run the tools, and it will collect the data, and it will ship the data over to the LLM, and then it will process that data, and it will then generate an answer to your original question. There are MCPs for interacting with Azure and Google Cloud Platform and Amazon Web Services. There are MCPs that focus on specific tools. And if you're doing Terraform, there's a Terraform MCP. How many of you have used Terraform? Pretty cool. Yeah. It's like, yeah, just blow the whole thing away and set it all back up again. Yes. Because if you're ever doing any work with data analytics, those kinds of things, you will learn how the ability to reset and try again is super important, because you are going to screw it up until you don't. Because once you don't screw it up and it does everything you want, then you're done. You're never going to actually change it again until it's time to screw it up again, or somebody gives you new data, or they change the project. The TAs, whom I have not heard anything from, I'm seriously concerned that they are dead someplace, or they've just simply taken the job and will turn in their timesheets and not actually do anything. I think it was, well, it wasn't this lecture hall, it was the other one, the big room, where I had to listen to them explain that as a TA, or as an instructor, you can't get the TAs to do anything. That it's all voluntary, basically. Like, okay, very interesting. That was my takeaway of it, at least. Okay. There's not any assessment for this, but what you do need to do is you need to get your own AI environment up and running so that you can play with these things, so you can ask questions, so you understand a little bit more about what it means to use these. And I don't care whether you set up your Ollama. Anybody running Ollama or LM Studio? Wow, couple people, not very many. Why not? You're like, what is it? Anybody know what Ollama is? Kind of, sort of. Okay, so all of these LLMs are a set of weights in a network. So they build this big package that describes the weights. It essentially becomes the matrix that gets loaded onto your GPU. If you have a GPU, or it can use a TPU, or it can actually do it on a CPU. Mostly, the resources available control how large a model you can execute. Does anybody here play video games on their computer? So you have a GPU. So that means that you can use that GPU to run an LLM locally. Let's see, who's got the best GPU? It turns out that Macs actually have pretty good GPUs, and it's not because the GPU is really good, it's because the memory architecture is really good. The memory architecture is shared between the CPU and the GPU. It's called the unified memory architecture, and it means you don't have to copy data from the CPU to the GPU. And as a systems person, I can tell you the best thing to do is never copy data. You don't think that's going to cost a lot. It turns out it's almost always the bottleneck. Moving data around is incredibly expensive. When you start using AWS, the cost of moving data outside of Amazon's web service to the client, to another site, you're like, wow, that's most of my bill. Yep. You're right. As you start doing this, I'm going to encourage this, well, it's a requirement for the actual projects. You need to be documenting your interactions. The goal here isn't for me to monitor and see if you're cheating. I'm assuming that everybody's going to cheat because I've just redefined cheating so that what you think of as cheating isn't actually cheating, because I want you to learn these things. And that means you have to use them. My goal here is to make sure that you're actually thinking about what you're doing and looking at it critically, because just the process of documenting it means you'll be going back and looking at it and saying, wait a minute, that was ChatGPT being performative. It was telling me what it thought I wanted to hear, not what was real, because at the time, my gosh, it spews out. It's very verbose. It spews out this huge block of text. I don't know about you. I'm not going to read all that, TLDR. No, so I skim through it. And then you go back and you start reflecting on it, and you're going, oh, I didn't notice that in the first pass through. So that's part of the goal here. It will also help you begin to know what to look for. What did I miss the first time? How can I make sure I don't miss that the second time? And then come back and share with me and the people I hang out with here what worked and what didn't work. And then we're going to get, this was actually what I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to set it up today, and we're going to talk about it more on Thursday. This is a real world case that I was involved in. I do work as an expert witness. And in this particular case, there was a company in Las Vegas, small company, does skydiving adventures. And they have a service mark. And they were unhappy because Groupon, anybody ever heard of Groupon? Okay. Groupon was posting messages in their Facebook area suggesting Groupon merchants. And the observation was that in fact the service mark was showing up in Groupon pages. But a lot of it could be explained away, not all of it, but a lot of it. And it wasn't actually until I was deposed, that's where I sit on one side and the lawyer for Groupon was sitting on the other asking me questions. He asked me a question and it made me realize I needed to go do an additional test. And that was, if I do a search on a site, so you take a term, in this case the service mark, and you say site : and you give it the website you want it to search. What will often happen is you will get some pages come back from some, because the way that the search works, it will embed the search term in metadata that comes back in the page. Okay, but if you put it in quotation marks, that means it has to literally be on the page, not in metadata. And the only site that I could find that did that was Groupon's, which meant that somebody had actually seeded the service mark in that. And I told that to the lawyer, and it turns out the lawyer never actually raised it in court because Las Vegas Skydiving lost their case, and Groupon was awarded $350,000 in legal fees. Part of why I'm bringing this up is because it is an example of what seems, from a technical perspective, a very simple thing. How many of you have ever clicked on a link? How many of you have looked at a link to understand how it is composed? Anytime you look at a link, almost anytime you look at a link, there will be a question mark in it. Everything after the question mark is for tracking. It is passing parameters. You will see FBID, for example. FBID equals Facebook ID. That will actually indicate where the message originated on, where the link originated on Facebook. When you go to YouTube and you say share, look at the link. The link will have a question mark and an SI equals, and that SI equals will be the source identifier. In other words, they will know that it's of the share you shared. If you watch, I posted a couple of YouTube links already. I strip them off. When I used Facebook a long time ago, I gave up years ago, my approach was always like everything. Even on Instagram, I do that. You know, it's like I'll go up to 4 ads deep, and I'll just like every non-advertisement. Why? Because I don't want them to be able to know what it is I actually like. If I like everything, it's the same as not liking anything at all. There are these companies that actually offer link shortening services. Do you know what a link shortening service does? It takes a long link and it turns it into a short link. Bitly is probably the most well-known of them, but there are others, but this is a big one. Why would you, what is the business model? How do you make money shortening links? Why do you use a short link? You want to know why? Because it gives us a different way of tracking you. I don't have to put a question mark there now, because you're going to click on that short link. That short link is going to go to Bitly. Bitly is going to look up the hash code, because that's all the short link is. It's a hash code. It's going to look up the hash code, and it's going to take the matching URL, which will have the reference IDs in it. It'll have all of that extra tracking state and that tracking data. So in this particular case, what Groupon did is they actually had a group, and this came out in the litigation. They actually had a group, in this case in Las Vegas, whose job was to go through and recruit other customers and to create marketing campaigns, and they would generate these links. And that is where they would put the reference ID to know what exact link it was that led people to Groupon. Groupon used their own short link service name. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it was, by looking at the domain name, you could go and find the registrar, and the registrar would then tell you who owned or controlled that. And so it belonged to Groupon, and it was managed by Bitly. So this Groupon link would appear on Facebook. You would click on it. It would take you to an advertising webpage showing you other people's skydiving adventures that they had managed to pull from this little company's Facebook page. If you go to the Bitly website, it used to be you didn't have to sign up. Now, I did it yesterday. It insisted I had to create an account, so now I'm getting junk mail from Bitly. Well, that's fine. I just ignore it like I ignore everything else in mail. And what are they doing? They're counting how many times people click on that link. So it's all about analytics. But that's what we're going to build. That's going to be what we're going to build. So we're just going to build a link shortening service. We're going to walk through that process. How do we actually do this with Amazon Web Services or Azure or Google Cloud Platform? And it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, because it's a very simple project, but it will help us work through breaking it down and then saying, now, how do I ask ChatGPT? How do I ask Gemini? This is what I'm trying to do. How do I go about doing it? Maybe I can actually do it with Claude Code. I know I can, actually. Claude sketched out an entire solution in about 30 seconds. So, yes, I actually did this. So I took that link, which is the link to the version of the course website on my personal website. And I gave it to Bitly, and it gave me back a short link. And that short link now will automatically map. If I want to see who clicks on that short link, I have to pay Bitly. And they will then give me analytics. They'll give me a whole dashboard to say, here's where things are coming from. Here's where the referrals are coming from. How many people know much about HTTP, or the HTML protocols and HTTP protocols? So when you get a referral, when somebody clicks on a link, what comes in to the next server is, where did this come from? The referral address. So it will know where on the internet you came from, and now we have enough to start tracking you. This is why we can sit here and I can talk about going on vacation in, let's see, let's pick someplace exotic. Someplace that none of us have ever been. Antarctica. I'm looking for pleasure cruises to Antarctica. And of course, tomorrow you'll be getting ads somewhere in one of your streams about pleasure cruises to Antarctica. Not that our devices are listening to us or anything, right? But this is how it works. This is really how we put this together. And we're just going to do it with Amazon Web Services. Actually, it was very interesting. It was ChatGPT that suggested this angle, and I was like, okay, I'll go with it. I'm fine with that. This is how we teach you about surveillance, corporate surveillance state that we use. Okay. I mean, these are technical problems. We're technical people. We're hired by these people, and we build the systems using the tools that we have available for us. As for the poor guy who lost a big lawsuit, that's kind of the reality of the situation. I can tell you that justice belongs to the people who have money. I only have testified at trial once, and that was in Philadelphia. And in that particular case, the party for whom I was working was a guy from China who got his PhD from Berkeley in electrical and computer engineering and was part of a company, and they had a falling out. And when I had dinner with him after I testified, he told me that he'd spent $2 million on his defense up to that point. Well, he won his case. He won pretty resoundly. The other side lost, appealed it, and then it went to the Third Circuit in the United States, which means it was in the same courthouse but a different part because it's in Philadelphia. And the plaintiff in that case lost the appeal. But it's great. I get mentioned in a US appellate decision. It's awesome. It almost never happens. Almost nothing ever actually goes there. So that's what we're going to be talking about, not today, but actually on Thursday. See, it started out as today's mission. And we're going to do it with free tier, and I'm going to use Cloudflow to show you how fast and easy it can be done. I don't even think I need to use Cloudflow. I can do it with just Claude. So we'll do that on Thursday. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, the Veronica I left in. Cool. All right. And I did have people at office hours yesterday. It was great. So I have to figure out when to do it again. Hey, how are you?
Good. My name's Torrin. I'm not brunch guy.
Hi, Torrin, brunch guy.
Yes. First of all, it was cool to just hear like your thoughts on structured video, what about that, and like how excited you're about AI. One question I have, given that you're file system and the main area of your research, I'm part of a startup here that's focusing on just hack control systems, so agent document control, file organization and naming. It's a pretty simple idea, but big applications. Then my main question for you is, outside of semantic search and RAG, where do you see LLMs and agents?
Actually, the way I use them in my research was all this surveillance data that we're gathering and collecting. We can actually retrieve it, our own data, and we can then use it to make it easier for us to find things. Because the way we remember is not based upon what it was called or where it was stored. We remember what we were doing at that time. And so how do you bridge that? And it turns out that in storage, there are only 4 things we can use. And you've mentioned 2 of them. The file name, file contents. Semantic is the file contents, the file name. We always know what the size of the file is. I couldn't find much to do with that. And then we have timestamps. And they all have timestamps. And the benefit or the approach that I ended up taking was I can take all of this information that you're already gathering about all the crap you're doing. And you can then come along and say, show me files let's say, one example was show me files about widgets. I don't remember where I stored it, but I do remember that day I had brunch in class and the prof mentioned it. And suddenly, you have a temporal anchor. And those timestamps that you've got in the files. So in my personal collection, I went from having 20, I need to turn off the recording, otherwise people will still be listening to us. And I have 28.5 million files in my collection, and if I can narrow it down to a week, that goes from 28 million to 28,000.
Okay.
And that is a huge.
So the angle is almost what was I using in the same time frame?
Right. Okay. Exactly. What other ways? So that's the only other hook that is actually available.
So in a business context, if you use certain project files along with certain
business meetings often get involved.